Hi Decoders, this week we're exploring our cultural habit of canceling wellness leaders. In this cultural setting, we're going to need a lot of discernment. Hi, I'm Kiran Trace. Welcome to Humans Decoded, a story of hobbits, fairies, elves, dwarfs, gnomes, and humans. If you get lost at any point, there is a deep dive on all the different avatars in episode 1. It includes notes. Thank you for joining us in a fun little chat about the vast potential of our human makeup. Hi Cam. Hi Leela.
Hi guys.
Hi everyone.
This came in from one of you guys, our gorgeous decoders. And I think, the cultural concept of cancel, which we can believe in or not, but we live in a world that's very heavy with the cancel button versus the redemption button. And so therefore it puts the onus on each one of us to really have some discernment. And what seems really important to me inside of all of this is, how do we discern a true boundary being crossed versus the MIGO getting offended? So, and when we're talking about wellness leaders, we're talking about like therapists, psychologists,
yoga teachers, Pilates teachers, acupuncturists,
life coaches, sports coaches, osteopaths.
Yeah, or physical therapists, spiritual teachers, energy healers.
So all of our well-being cohort, and it seems like something that would be really valuable to explore together.
Yeah, and I think it's also a great follow-up from our ick discussion, because you're using the same discernment. Are you bolting, or do you just need to go deeper? And in our ick episode last week, we decoded how there's a lot of nuances to this.
Because I think when we talk about this topic, there's also something to be said about this market of the wellness market is huge, right? And it's so easy to be a little overwhelmed by it because there's so many options you can choose from. And sometimes we end up doing a little bit here, a little bit there. And then we try this coach, this regime, and the next one. And it just makes me think of a line in one of the songs of Nick Mulvey, a singer-songwriter. And it says, "You'll never find the water when you're digging in so many shallow wells." And sometimes I feel like that's what might be happening here. If you keep jumping from one thing to the other, you might not actually allow yourself to truly discover the depth that is available when it gets a little uncomfortable. However, in order to know, where is it really worth letting myself go all the way down with this teaching or with this therapist, there's a ton of discernment needed.
I always say these days, it's so amazing because at this time, there's such a buffet of really skilled and beautiful teachers. And we're so lucky because that really hasn't happened before. We weren't living with that privilege like we do now. Like, rewind the clock 50 years, we don't have this huge buffet of beautiful, extraordinary wellness teachers to choose from. So I think the discernment comes around two things. Is this going to challenge my ego in a way that makes it possible for me to see this, hopefully? Or is it challenging a boundary? And, that's a really important thing to differentiate, to know when the ego is being crossed versus a boundary being crossed. Like, this is not obvious. This is not straightforward or easy to tell the difference.
Not at all. But maybe we need to define what is ego and what is actually a boundary.
Yeah, for sure. We need to take it slow if we're talking about all these nuances. So, yeah. Okay, what's a boundary? It's a line in the sand, right? It's something that determines the interactions that we're going to have in relationships. But let's look in a dictionary definition. Hello, Google. What is boundary? Helping individuals protect their emotional and mental well-being. Boundaries can be physical, emotional, psychological, and they guide how people treat each other and themselves. Okay, here's a practical example. I have a boundary. One of my boundaries is that I only spend so many hours a week on admin. The administration side of the business could consume all of my time. I could do 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, but it's a tragic waste of my time. So I have to put a boundary on that. If something needs more time than is allocated, it's just a hard no, because I don't have more to invest. So there's a boundary there, a line in the sand around my time, my expertise, my well-being. So if something requires a complex administration, shoot me, please. But what is ego? Ego is like, we talk about this all the time, it's baggage. You're doubling down on your baggage, but then you'd have to know your baggage really well.
Yeah, because basically this baggage is always pretending to be you, like the thing that takes, that can feel so like this is me, and it takes everything very personal, it's easily offended, and the whole world seems to revolve around it.
Yeah. Sometimes on the podcast we'll call it a MIGO. I call it that MIGO, big old me, like the world revolves around it. So recently I tripped on this. I was in the backyard of my cottage, and I never go there. And I have maintenance people who do, many people who do. It's rented, the renters go there. Lots of people go there. But I was there, and there was these silly things upturned and spilled. And in my head, I was like, why is this like this? I mean, how hard is it to put the chair back? Or why has no one put the solar light right side up? Now, that's actually my ego with a rule. My rule has said, if you walk past the solar light 20 times, it's on you to flip it back into the right place. I mean, right? Right? Listen to that personal undertone, you guys. Right? Am I not righteous in that? Like, am I not, like, don't we all think that? I mean, my God, people, right? It's a story. It's a rule. It sounds like a boundary. Like, I hire maintenance people to take care of the space, and they haven't. But that's not, like, if you can hear it, it's very personal. The world revolves around me. Because don't we all agree? If you fucking walk past the solar light, he who walks past the upturned solar lights 20 times is responsible for fixing it.
Sometimes I use that as a marker to check myself, like, is this pain body? Number one, is the whole world universe revolving around me, around this little niggling thing? If the answer is yes, then it's definitely suspect. And we talk about this MIGO all the time in the podcast. It's pain body, that little voice that wants to steal the moment, protect itself, distract you from ever really looking directly at itself. That little guy that wants to indulge itself ad infinitum and maybe find friends to indulge it too. That's the pain body.
So one is a real boundary and one is MIGO. But like, it's gray. It's so gray. It is like to see the difference. Man, if it was obvious, this stuff would be so easy.
Gray and so slippery. Like, it might be a boundary, but then the MIGO kicks in. So a boundary wouldn't be like, yeah, I'm holding rules in my hands and I'm applying them. A true boundary is often quite surprising, I find, and it can be unexpected. So then that would come from life. It's like a sort of a no that comes just from the moment. It's really impersonal in a way.
Yeah, and it's very liberating and intelligent, and it can show up in a surprising way. It's not always a hard rule.
It's so subtle sometimes to hear if you do have rules in your hands.
Mm-hmm.
like there's a lot of rules that all of us carry. Don't we all carry it? Like, no, here's one. Nobody should talk to another person aggressively because anger is a pain body and a clear signal that it's a MIGO. Okay, so that's like a rule. And if you have a real boundary that's bringing up rage in you, you might judge it and silence it, and then you become overly sweet or overly diplomatic. When the real boundary is sitting there screaming, right? Like, no freaking way! I think Jesus and the money changing table is such a beautiful story of a boundary. And a lot of the poignancy to that boundary is that he's a screaming mania in rage.
Kiran's referencing the story of Jesus in the temple where some people had put up a money exchange table. And he was like, not in the house of my father. And he just threw the table and he was raging. And, it's an example that we used in another episode about anger and boundaries. And it's going to be linked in the show notes, of course.
Cool. I didn't know Jesus had a rage episode.
Quite a few, actually. Quite a few.
He's a cool dude, I tell you.
Yeah. He's a clear dude.
Nice. So I have a little example of having to use this discernment, like, is it just me or is this a boundary? And it came up with my osteopath. I have this beautiful osteopath who I go to see. I've been seeing him for many years. He's an unbelievable healer. He does the most excellent treatments, and sometimes we chat. And I find that when I'm in the room getting the treatment, it's as if I can hear myself really clearly. So it's almost like I use him like a dowsing rod. So I'll say something I'm uncomfortable with, and then the sensations in my body are so amplified so I can like hear really loudly, like whether it's true or not. So we would, get into discussions and I would tell him about my life. But then over time, I found that his words were actually really confusing. So the treatment was true. The sort of sensations I'd hear myself were all true, but the things he would say really confused me. So I would walk away kind of more entangled than when I went in. And it's not even that what he was saying was wrong per se, it's just that he said it in such a way that left me feeling unempowered or more confused. And so what I realized is that his treatments are amazing and I want to go for that, but my boundary is that I just won't tell him about my life anymore. There's no point in getting into these deep exchanges because I won't get anything out of it.
I think part of what you're describing, Cam, is also the difference between a healer and a teacher. Like, you can be an amazing healer, but you're just not a teacher. Like me, for instance. Do not get into discussions with me. You will not get anything out of it, just confusion. But come for an energy healing session and you'll get a ton out of that one.
Yeah, this guy is definitely in the healer camp, and I've learned not the coach camp. Like, nope, not for that.
That is a great discernment. It's great.
And talking about this cancel button and discernment, it reminds me of a beautiful movement teacher I used to work with, and the work I've done with him was so wonderful. I've learned so much, especially about how to feel safe with another or others, as this particular movement practice included a lot of physical contact and sort of listening to your own body as well as these other bodies you're moving with. However, there came a point where I just saw how this teacher was truly continuing to cross boundaries with students, like saying really inappropriate things in group settings, being unnecessarily mean with students. Like, I remember one afternoon, he said to somebody who asked a very appropriate question, I think. He said, well, if you don't understand this by now, I can't help you. I don't know what you're even doing here. When all her question was doing was exposing a lack of clarity from his side, like pointing at his explaining things in a really wacky way. And the first time I met him, he did something very similar with me, and he did it all under the mantle of, well, this is just your ego reacting and I'm here to mirror you, so do not blame me. But it was not coming from truth. It was really horrible. And at the same time, quite helpful for me to watch, to see like, oh, so this is how a belief system of unworthy behaves in these settings, masking as clarity, like helpful for my own work as well, you know? And then later on, I also heard of misconduct situations around this teacher, and it was so clear, nah, I can't continue to work with that person, because as much as I love the practice, as much as I would have loved to continue, it's like, nope, had to cancel them completely. Goodbye.
You know, something also that needs to be said is like the work of a teacher is so dangerous. It's just a razor's edge, way more than people give credit to it. For example, this is especially true for non-dual teachers. So my job, my day job, is to show people beyond their belief systems. So my job is to literally move you past your own limitations. And there's a very big kickback against that. You know, we talk a lot in the podcast about our pain bodies, our baggage, but how it obscures facts and details and reality. We've discussed that, you know, like what Leela suggested there. Let's say you have a big old suitcase full of unworthy. It's like putting that lens on your glasses. So every time you see through your glasses, they're colored with that shape. They're skewed to unworthy, and therefore there's no accuracy. However, those inaccurate lenses that are obscuring the facts, you know, skewing to its own experience of unworthy, well, it can very easily point to a teacher, point to me, point to somebody else, I don't know, as being inappropriately or overly aggressive or crossing a boundary, these sorts of things. And so the teachers are sitting in a really dangerous seat. Every single person they're talking to can yell that there was an inappropriate boundary crossed, there was misconduct, they'll call you out, they'll hit the cancel button. And for that reason, it's a slippery slope, you know, and there's different things that we need to do. Like, for instance, me, I record every conversation I have with every staff member and every student so that there's a record. And if I did cross a boundary, right, then I need to redeem that. I need to apologize. I need to speak to this. I need to speak about how it's going to be different moving forward. Or was this a trigger? And it was, you know, somebody's MIGO, those lenses obscuring the details. But, you know, how anybody's going to deal with that is going to be different.
Yeah, from a student point of view, I can definitely relate to that. If your ego gets called out, it's really easy to want to lash out at the person who called you out. Because there's so much shame and charge coming from this, you know, like constellation of beliefs that don't want to get challenged. How dare you? So sometimes it has to be a very conscious choice to sit with that uncomfortable feeling and let the dust settle so you can see what's true.
Man, you can't underline that enough, like each step of that, you know? Because another challenge for a teacher is that when a student, so I'm saying teacher, but put, you know, wellness leader, you know, your therapist, your osteopath, what, you know, your physiologist, like whatever, that when a student's really camped out in resistance, and often the students don't know it. They don't know that they've like welded those lenses onto their glasses. Like they didn't see that, you know? And then it's like every time they're opening their mouth, it's like this energetic punch, you know, it's like punching their teacher in the face. Like, and that sounds dramatic, and it is, but it's because your teacher, your therapist, your mentor is bending over backwards, maybe for weeks, quite often for months, to whatever their tool is, they're amplifying or they're rooting out or they're using language, but they're energetically trying to uproot you from those lenses, try to push those lenses off, right? And the student who maybe usually has been available to walk to that edge, like peek through this like little glance of a little crack of daylight where there's no lens. So what happens is they can suddenly roll back and double down back to the comfort zone, so they like flip those lenses back on.
Never happened to me.
So the teacher's out on this edge, right, for weeks, energetically trying to hold that clear space or point to that clear space or point to the lens, right? And then the student doubles down. So energetically, that's like a punch. And because that resistant energy smashes against in opposition to where the teacher's been holding. And that's heavy. It's weighted, right? So that's a weighted hit. And it usually comes right out of the blue, right? Because pain body's like that. It's unpredictable. It's irregular. And so a lot of times in the teacher's seat or the wellness practitioner seat, they're going to lose their cool at being punched this way. Like a lot of times it can be a group setting, and this out of the blue punch happens. Maybe there's like a group inquiry and the teacher is so present, right? At that moment, it has to be so connected, so sensitive, leading an exploration. So they're holding the field of this group, which is an enormous energy expenditure. It can be. And I think it's deeply underestimated how much some of the wellness leaders are holding focused energy for a person, for a group. And then over in the left corner, this double down shows up in this smash, right? Or someone who just showed up for the first time today, they come in with their resistance, it's like punch, straight at the teachers, from their resistance pattern. So it's a profound skill for a teacher to keep their cool there. They literally just got smashed when they were going like 150 miles an hour in the other direction. And like, this sounds dramatic, but I actually use this metaphor a lot in my own life. I'll be like, ooh, I just got a really good punch in the face. Or sometimes I'll say like, oh, they just gave me a massive horse kick to my chest. Like I'll say it all the time. Like they came in with that resistance and it was just like smash me, Sometimes it's the job. But we also live in a society that doesn't have respect as a foundation in our contemporary culture. In fact, we've worn away a lot of those hierarchies that demanded an implicit respect, which is super, super valuable. I don't have any challenge to that. I think it's amazing. But it does leave wellness, spiritual teachers, these kinds of leaders in a precarious place because there's no respect implicit. There's no respect sort of demanded, right? So in the room, especially if you're new or if you're immature in that skill or you just got sideswiped on something you hadn't seen and all the shame starts coming out, like these are new awareness practices. So there's very little spoken about what it takes energetically in terms of clarity and non-reactivity in a teacher to move a person beyond their pain body comfort zone. Not to mention how to do that in a group.
I have an example for that on a, smaller normal person scale, not the Kiran huge capacity scale. So I've been assisting in a yoga teacher in India many, many years ago. And we've had this practice that we would place the mats of the students in different places in the yoga shala each day, in order to let them notice it's safe to practice in different spots. It's safe to not always take up the same one, because that's such an ingrained habit in many of us. And so one morning I remember placing one of the students' mats somewhere else, and the student totally flipped out and yelled at me. She said, "You're supposed to be a trauma-sensitive yoga teacher, and you're moving my mat around. You are making me feel so unsafe. Can't you see I've got problems and trauma? How the fuck dare you? You're so insensitive." I was like, whoa. I just moved your mat. That's all that happened. And none of it was personal. None of that had anything to do with, my emotional availability, my capacity to support her. Nada.
How do you guys do it? I mean, hats off. I remember Muji once reading a letter he'd gotten from someone out of the blue, like Kiran said, and it was just projecting this insane fantasy onto him. And it was like, you're building a mega city so that you can dominate it. You're gathering numbers so that you can take over. Yeah, it was just totally out there and based on zero fact. I also remember an instance, however, which was maybe a little more nuanced. I was on the video team back when I used to spend a lot of time with Muji. And for a while we had a team leader, and she kind of started losing the plot a little bit. It was clearly her ego wanting to take over. There was lots of yelling, but not any direction, and an urgency to everything, but like zero efficiency. And in one instance, she was trying to hurry us along and reroute the cables the camera was attached to, and she actually snipped one with a pair of scissors by accident. These are expensive cables, like that's quite a big oopsie. But she was so invested in the role of leader, she acted like nothing happened and carried on like sniping at someone else. It was a little bit funny. Needless to say, she was asked to step down from the role, and it was a loving intervention of sorts. She was told, this isn't the right place for you at this moment, and here's another team you can join for a while. And there's nothing wrong with that. It was a compassionate move. But watching it from the outside, I could see to her it was quite a traumatic movement, feeling like she'd been ganged up on. And at the time, I don't think they had the skills or the culture to offer her further support for that side of the meltdown. So I don't think it was a transgression, but it was just a shame that she was kind of left to her own devices afterwards. Like, she didn't get direct support to sort of unravel this particular pain body that was like driving her to, cut shit. So, she needed other mentors or teachers to help identify her habitual trauma patterns. And I think that's the type of scenario where it would be easy to place blame on the teacher and feel like a boundary was crossed.
It's very, very, very difficult to discern. Like we've been saying, if it was easy to discern, we wouldn't be caught up like this. And so we're saying here, we live in a culture that values cancellation. Great. That values misinformation. Maybe not so great. It values part of a story. It values opinion over fact. Overall, that's just the society we live in. Take it or leave it, but you're part of it. It doesn't put discernment at the forefront, right? It puts discernment at risk. So in that kind of a culture, we want everything to be black and white, but this terrain is gray. Very, very gray. And life is going to support what's true. But if we as a society don't value that, it becomes really challenging to discern. This becomes an enormous skill. So we can say things like, you have to be extremely honest with yourself. But that honesty is an evolving awareness. We can only be as honest as we've seen the lenses on our glasses, right? If we haven't actually even noticed, we cannot be honest that way. But we live in a culture that wants to yell labels all the time. It wants to yell misconduct. It wants to yell cult. It wants to yell abuse. It wants to yell trauma. We pretty much bang our finger and we call it trauma. Again, this is not a problem with our society. I don't have a problem, whatever. It's where we are. It's what is. But we have lost the values that would make truth and discernment easy or more easily accessible. So that means the onus is on us personally to cultivate it. And that's going to be an ongoing, regular, daily practice. And you're going to need at least these 3 things. 1, a really intense level of practice of being honest with yourself. So maybe you haven't seen the unworthy lens covering your glasses, but you can sure feel that personal, clingy grippiness that's making you the center of everything. You can feel the repression. There's other signals that you can listen for, but we'll call this an intense practice of being honest with yourself. Also, a very clear picture of the habitual patterns, understanding your habitual baggage, the one labeled unworthy, the one labeled I don't belong, the one labeled unlovable. Like, you got to be pretty available to expose that. You got to be you're practicing, like, sitting in that uncomfortable place to explore what it is. And you need a map of how those baggages interact, create habitual behaviors in you, right? So yeah, I do have this big old baggage called unworthy that I'm carrying around. And every time my sister does X, it explodes. Or every time my partner or the dog or my coworker, that's the map, right? Watching how those baggages open themselves up and start to clothe you and put the lenses on your glasses.
I love this sentence so much, Kiran. We can only be as honest as what we have seen in ourselves, because it feels like it points to the innocence of not seeing the lenses right away at times. Because I feel like what we're saying here is what makes this discernment so difficult is the pain bodies, the baggage that really wants to fight for itself. It wants to fight for its stories, right? Like, and some of those, with some of it, as you've been pointing out, like, we're so identified. The lenses are welded in, you said, so that we don't know that, Jesus Christ, this is a pain body belief. This is my baggage acting. This isn't me, like the authentic, actual me. And it can also be really difficult to discern if it's a crossed boundary, when you just love your practitioner, your teacher so much, and you actually do have a lot of respect for them, and you're immensely grateful for everything they've helped you with, they've done for you, and all the things you've seen thanks to them or their teachings. So it's tricky there to be like, hang on, no, I think this is a true boundary that's been crossed. And it makes me think of a yoga teacher I've had for years. I trained with her, and she's been an incredible friend to me. And I'll always and forever be deeply grateful. At some point, though, I could really sense I was done learning from her. It's difficult for me to really language how I knew it was true, but it was just this no from the moment, just a true boundary, and it wasn't my ego that was sort of hurt. There was nothing, there was no conflict or anything between the two of us. Maybe one way to describe it is that it didn't feel like there's more depth to explore with her, and I'm authentically wired for a lot of depth. So for a long time, this boundary made me very sad until I just accepted that, things had changed. I've outgrown my former teacher. It can happen. And then let's also address what makes it really hard when there's misconduct. I think it's very similar. It's this gratitude and trust I have for my practitioner, for my therapist, as well as if I have a level of unworthy story in my baggage, and I get this attention from my teacher, whatever inappropriate attention I might get from them, it might make me feel special, it might make me feel worthy, it might make me feel loved. And then how do I say no to that if all I see is through the thick lenses of unworthy? If that's the story I'm deeply identified with, it's hard and heartbreaking.
I had this teacher. She was beautiful. She felt like a lifeline at that moment in time. She really heard me. She saw me. These felt essential. It was right after my recent awakening. And my baggage at that moment was very loud. It was very in my face. And she was just really clear. It was refreshing, like a drink of cool, clear water on a grueling hike. Like I felt that I needed her, just kind of what you're saying there, Leela, the need. I was working with her, and it was a group setting, and she laid down some rules. And I had a very challenging time with those rules. They didn't fit. Like it just made the space uncomfortable. It made my participation in the group uncomfortable. I just couldn't be in that space with those rules. And then I realized after time they weren't true. They were her personal comfort zone. And wow, did I wrestle with that? Because I assumed it was my stuff. I assumed it was my baggage because that's what was so up. And weeks and weeks and weeks went by blistering around this. And then suddenly I saw, oh, this is a control tactic. It's a personal comfort zone, but it's a control tactic. And then it was really, really hard to walk away from that cool, clear water source when I had this attachment, right? I had attached here. And like, it just seems so obvious to me now. These hard lines she put in the sand were not boundaries. But it was hard. Nevertheless, I will say the intelligence that unfolded when I saw it, so in this case it wasn't a misconduct situation, but it could include a misconduct situation. When I saw it, when I walked away, it was huge. I won a lot of freedom that day. And a freedom that helped me many, many, many times over. And, does that mean I hit the cancel button, hoping that everyone else can win freedom or like gather intelligence? It's who, you know what I mean? Like I in myself, it was so obvious. There's no cancel button there at all. That was my intelligence and my freedom to win.
I remember having that kind of deliberation over and over again with my Tai Chi teacher. I guess it was one of the first kind of healing or wellness practitioners I'd worked with, and I'd been with them for 6-7 years. I had learned so much, and there was just so much love and respect, and they'd carried me through some tough times, but at some point I kind of knew they'd just run out of road. They had reached a place within themselves that they weren't willing to face, and life kept closing in on them. And so they were teaching these beautiful tools, but kind of stopped embodying them. So that's when I knew I gotta go. And it is heartbreaking. But at this point I had already found Muji, so it was a seamless transition. And I do feel like somehow they always overlap somehow. Like there's just that little bit more freedom available. So ultimately, decoders, we're asking for a lot of maturity here. A really deep desire to be honest with yourselves more than you want to delude yourselves. And honesty can be really uncomfortable. It can flip stuff on its head. Careers, home, marriages, family dynamics. It's powerful stuff. But you have to want it. You have to want the truth. You have to want to glean the intelligence of it more than you want to hold on to the known shapes of your life. And evolution is a really courageous game. And so it helps if you have a very clear map of the swords you tend to fall on, like Kiran was saying. A map of those habitual patterns where something triggers you and fear wants to run you over. to have a map of your stuck places. So when that situation comes around, when you need to utilize that discernment, you can see, okay, this is that sort of swamp area that gets really grippy for me. The voices are really loud. They have a lot of agenda. So I know I have to tread carefully around here because I know this is the place where my ego wants to flare up and claim something. Or perhaps you already know these places in yourself and something still smells off. The alarm bells are kind of clanging, and then you know it's a boundary being crossed.
All right. Deep stuff here. So see you next week, and maybe in the meantime reflect on, is this episode somehow crossing a boundary for you? Does it feel offensive? It's totally okay. It's totally okay also to bounce from time to time by one of the episodes or from one of the episodes and then come back whenever you're ready. You know, it happens. It's okay. It's all forgiven anyway. And maybe you want to share with us what other episode might have triggered you or might have crossed the boundary. You know where to find us, definitely on our Facebook podcast Humans Decoded page, on our Facebook Humans Decoded podcast page.
I just want to remind you guys listening this far, sorry, it has been a long episode, but it takes a lot of nuance and discernment to talk about these things. But we do want to remind you that the retreat, our summer retreat, which is so wonderful, has an early bird pricing, and that's a $500 discount. And it ends at the end of this month. So there's just a few days left. Check the website under events or email us. The link is below.
And we're so grateful for your reviews. If you love or even, mildly like this podcast and appreciate how it touches your life, we'd be so glad, so honored if you could write a review. And if you don't have anything good to say, send us an email. Bad feedback is great for us to understand. We learn a lot. So we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. We obviously love hearing what you think. Your feedback helps us make a better show for you to listen to. So feel free to comment, and you can do it at Facebook, which is the Humans Decoded podcast. And if you're not on social, you can always email any questions to us at outreach@kirantrace.com. And thanks for listening. We love you.